I'm right in the middle of doing the annual on 476, and I got the chance to talk to a fellow who had an A30 engine failure in his A35. So stick with us on Flywire. Hey, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on Flywire we get a chance to talk to Terry Hoskins, who had an engine failure, partial engine failure. Well, the majority of his engine wasn't producing power, but it still ran, and he had to do a forced landing. So and walked away from it. It's awesome stories. Let's hear what Terry has to say. And was leaving Huntsville, Alabama area on a trip through the southwest of Georgia, and he had a partial thrust situation that was not enough power to fly, and was able to put it on a road and walk away. It was a wonderful result, and we're going to talk to Terry about it today. So Terry, if you could tell me a little bit before we hear about the accident, I really like to hear about you and what got you interested in flying, and in particular in Bonanzas.
Well, I've been flying a long time. I started at the age of 12 with my grandfather, and have been flying for many years without a logbook. And then after that, I got serious, and later, as I had time and money, finished my pilot license, and eventually went on to get instrument rating and commercial pilot license, and flew for a little while as a scenic tour pilot. So, and I did that in Dallas. I was a scenic tour pilot in Dallas. So I've got 1,100 hours or so thereabouts, and 600 plus of those are in Bonanzas.
Cool.
So that's probably some experience that got me through this situation, to be honest. I got my commercial license in a Myers 200, which is kind of rare. And that airplane sinks like a rock when you turn the power off. So that experience probably helped me a lot in this situation too, being able to anticipate the sink rate with no power. So I had some pretty good experience leading up to the situation that kind of like Slumdog Millionaire led me to a successful outcome of this of this opportunity to prove my skills, I guess. But it didn't come out perfect. Definitely didn't come out perfect.
Perfect is rare and far between, frankly. So tell us what happened. What was the setup, and what did you first notice?
So we were flying along at 5,500 feet, getting close to Atlanta Class B, and in order to get below the shelf for Atlanta Class B, we descended to 4,000 feet and stayed level there for a couple of minutes, 2 or 3 minutes maybe at the most, and then sudden power loss. It was, you could, it wasn't subtle. It was very sudden and abrupt, and immediately smelled gasoline in the cockpit, and knew something was really wrong. And at that time, obviously, the pilot load got very, very high, and so I'm flying the airplane and doing my best to communicate with ATC and ask for vectors to nearest. But we had a little difficulty talking to ATC. They were a little late switching us, so we ended up getting our communication relayed by another close airplane who I don't know who that was, but they were very helpful to me. And we got another frequency. We switched over to them, and this all transpired in a matter of 20 seconds or something, but it felt like an eternity. And so, we got on with ATC as we are trying to fly the airplane. And I had a friend with me who's also a very skilled pilot, and he was trying to go through the diagnosis while I'm trying to maintain sink rate and best glide and look around for what to do next. So he was kind of adjusting the throttle and propeller pitch, just trying to find the best combination that would improve the sink rate. At that point, there was no level flight. The best we could do was about minus 600 feet a minute. And so ATC finally got back to us and said, vector 090, you got an airport 5 miles off your nose. And at that point, I knew we weren't going to make an airport, and all I could see in front of us were trees and hills. So I started, deciding, I kind of instantly decided I'm landing on that only road I see over there to the right. So you can look, if you look at the flight path, you can see my abrupt decision to turn toward that road and align for the landing. So I flew toward that road, and luckily it was a 2-lane highway with a passing lane in that stretch, which was why I could see it. Some of the other roads were tree covered and definitely not, able to be landed upon, or maybe not easily. So I turned toward that road and flew pretty aggressively to be able to manage the energy and align for that landing, and align to that road. And I kind of swooped down to land, and last second saw power lines right in our way, and I dodged the first set. I went under them. But what I didn't prepare for was the next set of power lines. And so as I swooped under the first set, I picked up a lot of speed, and I was really close to the ground. I was planning to just kind of float along the ground level and dissipate energy until I could settle on the ground. But the ground effect, we think, and talking about it afterward, ground effect at that speed was substantial enough to cause me to balloon back up a lot. And so I hit the next set of power lines nose first, and it was a pretty big arc flash, and pretty
dramatic.
Dramatic. Yeah, that's the best way to put it. I didn't know that my tail was damaged. I didn't know that they caught my tail too. I just knew that my prop went through them. The prop was still spinning. Luckily, didn't have any power, but it was still spinning. And I think that kind of helped to cut the lines rather than them hang me up. And I had a lot of speed because I had just, swooped down below the first set of power lines, and I, luckily just pushed right through them. And then after that, it didn't knock me off course, and it didn't alter my airplane attitude severely. And I landed normally with full rudder control. I was on the rudders the whole time, trying to, align to the road and keep the airplane as coordinated as possible until I settled on the road and landed and taxied off to the side of the road. I just have to say that as badly as the tail on the airplane was damaged, that it's a testament to the strength of the B-3 tail, that's for sure. I mean, I feel like if that had been a lesser airplane, it might not have fared so well.
Yeah, I agree with you that, and we'll have pictures of that you sent, and we'll post this across the interview. But it did. That tail held together, and that's what broke the wire, I think.
I think so too. Yeah, we the power lines we hit were 3-phase high voltage power lines. It wasn't just a residential service from a transformer. It was big power lines, carrying power to that area.
Yeah.
So it was they weren't high tension on a big tower. They were probably 40 feet off the ground or something, and they were aligned 3-phase lines.
Yeah, it looked the cable looks like it's probably 3/4 of an inch or better.
The steel core is what you could see across the nose of the airplane and kind of wrapped around the sides of the airplane, around the gear and around the tail. And then that steel core is wrapped with aluminum that helps to improve the conductivity of that, that wire. Steel core is there for tensile strength. The aluminum is really the conductor in that environment for that configuration.
That's interesting.
So the aluminum definitely came unraveled, and you could see it all over the airplane, just wrapped around everything. And then the steel core luckily gave way. I can't believe that steel core didn't take my tail off. It was really impressive feat of engineering for that tail to take that direct hit and shear that cable.
Yeah, I agree.
You can see the wrinkle in the empennage in some of those pictures that the tail took the hit, it wrinkled the empennage, and it still didn't come off. You hear a lot of people talk about Bonanza tails are weak, or Bonanza tails are, don't have the strength of other aircraft, but I beg to differ.
Yeah. You actually flight tested it.
I did. Yeah. I didn't have strain gauges on it, but I can tell you that it was pretty strong.
Yeah. Well, you could figure out the braking strength of that cable. So speed actually was probably in your favor
Yeah,
there.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I
So
think
it was just the two of you in the airplane?
that's right. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
you landed, you got it on the ground, you just coasted off to the side of the road, and then what'd you do?
it's a little bit of a blur after that. We hopped out of the airplane, and so I did what I left out of that story was I landed kind of right behind a little white SUV that was driving in the same direction. And I think he was probably pretty nervous about the whole thing, and maybe was startled by it at least. And he kind of went up and turned. He was an older guy. Went up and turned around and came back and asked if there was anything we need. And we said, no, I think we're all right. And so he drove off. I thought he'd maybe stay around, but
Yeah.
he drove off. I guess he had somewhere to be. But I immediately got out of the airplane and started trying to figure out what happened. I'm an engineer. I've got an aviation background. I was an aviation mechanic in the Marines. And so I have a very big curiosity, an airplane I've had for over a decade, known very well the mechanical condition of that airplane for over a decade, just suddenly left me hanging, in the air with no power. So I have to admit, I was pretty puzzled what could have caused that. The carburetor wasn't very old, pretty recently overhauled, not too many years ago. The fuel pump was pretty new, fairly recently overhauled, not too many years ago. Top overhaul not too long ago. Just couldn't imagine what would have caused that condition. So I pulled the cheek plates off the plane right there on the side of the road, started investigating, had somebody go inside the airplane and pump the ox pump. And as soon as they did, I could see the huge fuel leak coming from that aluminum tubing that I've sent you a video of.
Right. And we'll play that.
Yeah. That tubing is a very small diameter tubing, but it sure was enough to.
Yeah, it took all the pressure went there.
It's a pressure carburetor too, so it's got to have 10 psi or better. I'm not a carburetor expert, but it's got to have more fuel pressure than I was able to deliver to it in order to make power.
Yeah. That was a pretty big split, and fire hazard in itself, pouring fuel into the engine bay, raw fuel into the engine bay.
Well, I smelled fuel in the cockpit. It was coming. It was everywhere, and it did ignite at one point, not in the cockpit, but it did ignite in the engine bay. And the engine bay is all charred now from that ignition. I think it ignited when it hit the power lines.
Oh yeah, well that would make sense with the arcing would spark the fumes.
So, yeah, I think that's when it lit off. But by that point, we were almost on the ground. Didn't have any fuel really pumping into that area anymore. We were trying to, land the airplane.
Had you shut the engine off at that point, or was it still running?
No, I never shut the engine off. And I don't know if it had enough power to run on its own at that point, or if it was just windmilling. I can't really tell you for sure, but I know that when we got to the side of the road, it stopped.
Yeah, it probably did. It was probably windmilling, especially when it hit the power line. I would think that would be enough of a jolt.
That might have stopped the engine. I don't remember. I know that when we landed on the road and rolled off to the side of the road, the prop wasn't spinning anymore. It was definitely quiet. All I could hear was the wheels rolling on the ground, and I was pretty happy to hear that.
Yeah, I bet. That was wonderful. So, cell phone, call home, get a ride.
First thing I did was, ATC I was on VFR flight following, so
okay.
They had emergency crews there quickly. I would say within 5 minutes there was emergency and rescue, fire and rescue on the scene. There was a little bit of a brush fire on the side of the road from the power lines, and that they put that out pretty quickly. And I did call 911, and I talked to the operator and told her I was the pilot of the airplane, and they relayed that I was still alive to ATC. I guess I'm not sure how that happened. I thought about calling the RTCC and just let them know that I was still alive, because I know those guys beat themselves up about that kind of thing. But I didn't make that call. I felt like I had enough going on at that time, and that 911 would relay the message, I hoped.
Yeah, it probably did, but it wouldn't hurt to
give him a shout now and say, the dust is settled, and I just wanted to say thank you or something like that.
Yeah, I thought about writing them a letter or something. Just kind of, relay the things. I know they kind of beat themselves up about that. What could they have done differently? The same way I beat myself up about what could I have done differently in the airplane,
Well, you're 4,000 feet. Excuse me. What's the elevation of the ground there?
1,300 feet.
So you really didn't, you were in the pattern basically, because we preach, high key is 2,500 feet. So you were there basically.
From the time that the incident occurred till the time I was sitting on the ground looking at the airplane was about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Maybe 3.5 minutes. I'm not exactly sure, but looking back at the flight data on ForeFlight, it looks like it was about 3 to 4 minutes.
Yeah. Well, cool. That's a hell of a story. I'm proud of you. Well, Terry, thanks for joining us and telling your story. I really appreciate that. I think other folks will like it too.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time and talking to me about it. My main purpose in this is just to kind of share my story, just so other people can learn from it and potentially, deal with it more effectively, or maybe avoid it if possible. So,
yeah.
Hey, I'd like to wrap this up by saying I really appreciate Terry coming on and talking to me on Flywire, because I think there's a lot of lessons learned here for everybody, and timing and, what your focus needs to be, all these kind of things. And I want to take this opportunity to do a foot stomp here for an engine failure. So the first thing you want to do is you want to set up for the glide. What's your best glide speed, and get to your best glide speed, trim for it. Then you can turn your attention to the next thing, which is finding a place to land. I don't care what altitude you are, 10,000 above or 2,500 feet above the ground. The second thing you do is you find a place to land, okay? Then if you have time, you can focus on trying to get the engine restarted. In this case, Terry's buddy in the right seat was a pilot, so he gave that over to him, and he tried to get it started, couldn't do it. And Terry then focused on what he needed to do, and that was land. And all that forest and everything, he chose a road. He put the gear down and attempted to make a normal landing, and almost did, but he ran into some power lines, literally, and that kind of ruined that aspect of it. But that brings me to the next item, which is you have to have that trigger point when you're going to stop messing with the engine, trying to get it restarted, and you're going to start getting ready to land, okay? And is that 3,000 feet? 2,500 feet above the ground, whatever that ground elevation is, you need to focus on maneuvering for landing, okay? That's what your focus has to be on, not worried about the engine anymore. Give it up, okay? And then you got to make the decision. It can be gear up or gear down if you're a complex airplane. I would say that unless it's a prepared surface, like in this case, that road, then you want to land gear up. And the reason why is you don't do much damage to the airplane, but you're also not going to damage yourself. And the little bitty tires, unless you have big tires, the little bitty tires tend to dig in, and that dissipation of energy works out real fast, and it injures a lot of people. So gear up, worry about the airplane next, okay? That last final thing is the airplane's job is to get you on the ground in one piece, to be able to walk away. You're and your passengers. That's the objective of this exercise, is to get back on the ground in one piece. If you can reuse the airplane later on, great, but if you can't, you can move on with your lives, and that is the best outcome here. In this case, it didn't quite work out. I mean, he was able to put the gear down. It looked like he was going to make a normal landing, and then the power lines got in the way. You can't see those things. They're just so small that you don't see them till late. And I got a story about that. But anyway, I think Terry did a great job, he and his buddy, so I'm proud of him. And I think next time, if I ever meet him, I'll buy him a beer, because I think he deserves it. Then I really appreciate him sharing these stories so we can learn from him as well. I hope you enjoyed it, and think about what you might do and focus on if it ever happened to you. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Flywire.